All right, what's the site? Excellent. And what happens between stratum 7B and 7A? There is a destruction. By whom? You don't get to answer. What happens? Who's responsible for this? Some pharaoh. What pharaoh? Oh, I invite you to look at your notes. Merneptah. When does Merneptah live? Or reign, more properly. When does Merneptah reign? Dates? Is that what you were going to say? 1212 to 1202. End of the 13th century is Merneptah, and it is likely, he is likely the cause of the destruction here at Megiddo, which caused some rebuilding, but did not change the character of the site demonstrably. So here he is. Here's our guy, Merneptah. And how do we know, why can we connect Merneptah with the destruction at Megiddo? Somebody else? The hieroglyphics say so, and the hieroglyphics cannot lie. And where are those hieroglyphics? We haven't actually seen the Merneptah stele yet. Where have we seen those hieroglyphics? Karnak. Karnak. On a great big wall called the Cour de la Cachette. And on that wall there are big reliefs of 3 cities that were destroyed by Merneptah. And they are Ashkelon and Megiddo and another city called Yanoam. All right. That's the end of the 13th century. And very shortly after that, in the early part of the 12th century, there are a whole series of destructions along the eastern Mediterranean seaboard and the major cities of Cyprus. Insofar as we can tell archaeologically, these all happened more or less in the same time zone. So late 13th, early 12th centuries BCE. And we have some texts from this period from rulers in Anatolia. You have to ignore the fact that this says Persia here and retroject your mind into the Bronze Age. Persia isn't even around yet. Persia is a classical thing. But in the Bronze Age, this is the kingdom of the Hittites, and they are the third of the superpowers in this larger region at this time. There are the Hittites, there are the Assyrians that are over in this neck of the woods if you keep the map going in that direction, and there is the new kingdom of Egypt. And the Hittites wrote, sorry about that, I have a hard time figuring out where to put the mic best. The Hittites wrote, the Hittite king wrote to the Egyptian king around this time, latter part of the 13th, early part of the 12th century. From the sun, the great king, that would be the Hittite king, I gave orders to somebody else regarding somebody who was taken captive by the Sikalayu, who live on ships. Now you are to send this guy, Lanadosu, whom the Sikalayu captured here to me, and I will ask him what is the matter with them and what are their affairs. There was a lot of correspondence going back and forth between the Hittite king and the Egyptian king about not only these Sikalayu, but various other weirdly named peoples, tribal groups, who travel about on ships and who make trouble and who wreak havoc. Some of the Canaanite kings from cities along the Levantine coast also wrote letters, very worried letters, asking for help to the Pharaoh down in Egypt. And there were an especially lot of destructions in some of the cities on the southern Levantine coast. Ashkelon and some of the other cities down there, such as Ekron, experienced massive conflagrations. Another pharaoh with some more hieroglyphs and some more pictures on another wall in another temple in Egypt provides us with an identification for these folk who roam by sea and wreak havoc. Howard.
How do we tell whether those destructions along the seaboard there were from the Hittite or Egyptian kings rather than the invading Israelites, the Canaanites?
They aren't from any of those destructions, or they are likely not from any of those. And the identity of the culprits in these particular cases, why are they not Egyptians or Hittites or Canaanites, for example? Well, the Canaanites don't actually go out on ships and wreak havoc. In fact, they don't seem to fight one another at all. There's very little in the way of internecine warfare in Canaan in the Middle and the Late Bronze Age. So if it were the Canaanites, it would be some kind of personality transplant that they suddenly had, which is not impossible, but is unlikely. The reason that we can identify, first of all, the contemporaneity of all of these destructions, and second of all, have some sense about who they are, has to do with the archaeological evidence at each of these sites. A new kind of pottery shows up immediately in the levels above the destruction levels. And that new pottery sticks around for a long time, and the people who bring it settle down in those places. Those people come from someplace else. They don't come from Egypt. They don't come from Hatti, which is Hittite land. And they stay. And so we identify the destroyers with the people who move on top of and then inhabit those places.
Who were they?
Well, now I'm about to tell you who they were. All right, so we're looking here at an aerial view of the mortuary temple of Ramses III at Medinet Habu, which is just outside of Thebes in Upper Egypt on the other side of the Nile from Karnak. And you see the dates of the reign of Ramses III, 1195 to 1164, a long-lived, very busy pharaoh. And on the walls and columns of one of the interior courts at Medinet Habu is an enormous inscription that reads, "The northerners in their isles were disturbed, taken away in the fray one at a time. Not one stood before their hands." The northerners in their isles are the people who live on Cyprus and the people who live on the islands along the Asia Minor seaboard. Carchemish, Arvad, Alashaya, they were wasted. These are cities and places. Alashaya is actually Cyprus, north of Egypt. And those destroyers set up a camp. They desolated people and land. They came with fire prepared before them forward to Egypt. Their main support were, and here we have the identity of these havoc-bearing, sea-traveling folks. The Peleset, the Checker, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, and the Weshesh. Great names. These lands were united. They laid their hands upon the land as far as the circle of the earth. Their hearts were confident, full of their plans. Now, it happened through this God, the Lord of gods, that I was prepared and armed to trap them like wildfowl. He, the God, that is to say, furnished my strength, caused my plans to prosper. I, Ramses III, went forth directing these marvelous things. I equipped my frontier that was prepared before them. Those who reached my boundary, their seed is not. Their heart and their soul are finished forever and ever. You know, if you're going to go to the trouble of inscribing a large inscription on a wall for everybody to see forever, you do not say, there were troubles, the battle went back and forth, things didn't really work out as planned. These inscriptions are all about complete annihilation and total victory on the part of the Pharaoh. One may reasonably decide that it is not perhaps exactly as the Pharaoh would have you believe, but certain parts of the story are probably reasonable. That is to say, these folks, the Peleset, Sheker, Shekelesh, Denyen, and Weshesh, I just love to say their names, came by sea. They also, actually, we know from other parts of inscriptions, come overland as well. They do attack in Egypt. They are pushed away from settling down in Egypt. And it is they who we call in a group name the sea peoples, peoples who come by the sea, as they are also known in other Egyptian texts and also Hittite texts, these peoples who come by the sea peoples, who are the likely culprits for these series of destructions along the eastern Mediterranean seaboard in the late 13th and early 12th centuries, and who settle down. Now, all of them are individual tribal groups, and the ones that we are going to focus on are the Peleset, because it's the Peleset who are the Philistines. That's where we get the name. What do they look like? Here they are, according to the Egyptian sculptors. They are tall and rangy. They have these bizarre headdresses, straight noses. They are beardless. They have very specific and very consistent physiognomy. And here they're being rounded up as captives by the Egyptian king. And you see here a drawing of another part of the sculptures on the temple at Medinet Habu that show them experiencing some trouble in battle. Even when there are a lot of them and only a few Egyptians, they come out the worse for wear in the Egyptian rendition. These various tribal units are not distinguished in the way they look in these reliefs. They all look the same, and they all wear these weird, fearsome headdresses. And in another part of the relief, actually this is a part of the relief that's above the inscription that you just read, you see Ramses and these peoples arriving, coming in by boat. You can see their various boats here, and here's another one. They have masts, and there's all the oarsmen. So it's a frenetic and enormous battle that is recorded on the mortuary temple of Ramses at Medinet Habu. The various of these tribes, the Denyen and the Weshwesh and the Sikalayu and all sorts, the Sherdana, settle in various places down the eastern Mediterranean coast. And their individual stories are fascinating and traceable. And if you are interested in the sea peoples and want more details about individual tribes, I can point you to various articles and studies that try to identify and track different ones of them. They are largely they come from the same area, and the settlements that they inhabit share a lot of similarities. We will focus only on the Peleset, who are the ones that make landfall and settle down right here in the southern coastal plain and the Shvelah of Israel, and give their name to the region as a whole, Philistia, and to the people who've come down to us through their being recorded in the Hebrew Bible, the Philistines. At various sites in what I will now call Philistia, this region of the southern coastal plain and the interior Shephelah that adjoins it, large cities of the Middle and Late Bronze Age are destroyed pretty thoroughly and immediately re-inhabited. We can identify the concurrence of these events, the destruction and the rehabilitation, because in all of them, that last destruction level has Mycenaean pottery, pottery from Mycenaean Greece, imported. You remember that one of the features of Canaanite culture is long-distance trade, international luxury goods, and international objects. And while I didn't put it on the screen when we were talking about some of the Canaanite sites, you saw luxury goods, ivories from Syria, from Egypt, cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia. I could have showed you, just didn't bother, pottery from Mycenaean Greece, decorated pottery. And so the late Bronze Age levels at all of these sites have such wares, and it is in the levels that have all of those wares where we get this destruction. And Ashkelon is one of those sites. Pretty serious, widespread destruction. And in the stratigraphic levels immediately above that late 13th, end of the late Bronze Age destruction, a brand new kind of pottery appears. It's locally made. It's made here in these places, in these sites. It's made out of local clays. Kilns have been found. And it is decorated with painted designs, but only in one color. And this kind of pottery is called by archaeologists, when they find it, Sea People's Monochrome, which is not as bad as some pottery names, but, you know, still a little boring. Pottery specialists in archaeology, very imaginatively challenged when it comes to naming things. So you just have to excuse them as a class, as a group of modern scholars. So Sea People's Monochrome, usually abbreviated SPM for short, and I encourage you to do that because it takes a long time to write Sea People's Monochrome. And you see some examples here. Here's some individual sherds, and here are some, there's a big bowl with handles, a kind of crater, and another bowl. And you get the point. Monochrome, because there's only one color painted on the clay. The clay body is left plain. There's no slip on it. The paint is applied directly to it. And that means that even if you find a little fragment of it, like these, it's pretty easy to identify. It's paint applied directly to the clay, only one color of paint, Sea People's Monochrome. In the strata above the strata that have Sea People's Monochrome, as the regular kind of pottery, we see, oh, hold on, good, you're all sitting down, two colors. Yes. So we call this bichrome. And by now we're comfortable with calling the Sea People's Philistines, so now the archaeologists call this Philistine bichrome. And you see some of the lovely examples of Philistine bichrome here. More big bowls, smaller cups in the same shape, jars with spouts, pouring spouts, bottles, and this very weird kind of vessel that's called a stirrup jar. This is not open. This is like a fake neck and top. The spout is actually here. These are almost certainly jars for perfume or perfumed oil. You could slip your fingers underneath the two handles and then put your thumb over this making it like a thumb rest, and then turn it over and sprinkle out some oil out of the spout. So that's why they have this odd combination of spout and neck, these things that are called stirrup jars. All right, so So Sea People's monochrome in the earliest levels above the destruction of these big cities, and Philistine bichrome in the next levels. A lot of it at the big cities in the southern coastal plain and the Shephelah in Philistia, over 50% of the pottery found in these levels is Sea People's monochrome and then Philistine bichrome. So this is not a visit by somebody. This is people moving in, settling down, and staying for a while. This is people making themselves at home. That's the interpretation of this material phenomenon. If you would find a few fragments, like you find a few, in the late Bronze Age, we found a few Mycenaean vessels. That's trade or exchange or a present that somebody got. But here we have the local production of this brand new kind of pottery in tremendous quantity and for a while. That is a reflection of the people who come and stay. This thing does not work. Where did the Sea People / Philistines come up with this extremely radical idea to introduce another color on their pots? Well, probably because there were people living here when the Philistines got here. They were the Canaanites. And among the things that the Canaanites liked to do was use two colors on their pottery. They had bichrome painted pottery for hundreds of years already. It was the common sort of pottery. And you're looking here at some Canaanite bichrome from the city of Gezer, the site of Gezer, that is contemporary with Philistine bichrome. The shapes are different. The designs are different. Philistine bichrome is made at various Philistine sites. So it's not like there's one great big, pottery manufacturing depot in the area, and the Canaanites go and buy one sort of thing, and the Philistines go and they buy another sort of thing. These pottery manufactories are separate in their various sites. But the simple idea of putting two colors on pots, well, this appealed to these folks who had settled in this area, and so they adopt the practice. All right, let's look at a couple of these sites in particular and see what the Philistines do once they settle down. This is Tel McNay. Tel McNay, it usually comes with two names when you read about it, and the reason is that when Hebrew University and the Albright Institute, who began excavations at this site in the 1980s, started, it was a site without an ancient identification. It was Tel is just the Hebrew and Arabic word for big mound, and most sites have a modern name that is Tel something or another. Big mound, fill in the blank. And in this case, this great big mound had been called Tel McNay. But after about 10 years of excavation, the archaeologists here found evidence that you will actually be learning about in a couple of weeks when we get to Iron 2 at this site, that the ancient name of this site was Ekron. And Ekron is a name that we know from the Hebrew Bible, among other ancient historical sources. And but all of the early reports about it read Tel McNay, and so now frequently this is how you see the name, Tel McNay / Ekron. Okay, Tel McNay Ekron is an enormous site with an upper acropolis. I have shown you this image before, an upper acropolis and a lower city. It was a Canaanite city throughout the Middle and the Late Bronze Age. Like Hatzor, McNay, Ekron, this huge lower city was actually constructed in the Middle Bronze Age, in the first half of the second millennium. Unlike Hatzor, by the Late Bronze Age, people were only living on the Acropolis. It was very small and it was unfortified. This made it an excellent target. It was this huge mound in this fertile area, but it was easy pickings. Not that many people lived there. The site was unfortified. So the only occupation in the Late Bronze Age was up here on the Acropolis, which incidentally is, I think I have measurements someplace here. 10 acres. 10 acres, the Acropolis is 10 acres, and the lower city, 40 acres. This is considerably smaller than Hatzor, you may recall, 170 acres, just the lower city of Hatzor. The citadel of Hatzor was 30 acres, which is just a little bit under the size of the lower city at McNay, just to give you a sense of scale and remind you of the colossal size of Hatzor. But McNay still constitutes a city. It's sufficiently large to be called that. Okay. The Late Bronze Age levels on the Acropolis end in fire, conflagration, charred remains on the floors, walls tipped over, and the fire is systematic over the whole area of the Late Bronze Age remains on the Acropolis, which you're looking at here in aerial view, and so fast that goods were burned in place. This is a jar filled with figs that were burned up in this great conflagration at the end of the Late Bronze Age. In these levels here, Mycenaean, that is Greek pottery, Egyptian artifacts from the 13th century, and immediately above that conflagration, a new set of structures built, including an industrial area with a kiln where Sea People's monochrome was manufactured. And you're looking here at a bunch of waste from the kiln on the Acropolis at McNay. And this waste comprises, as you can now all identify readily, monochromatic pottery with squiggles and swirls. And here's the bottom part of a little birdie. The Philistines like to put little bird decorations on their pots. So this is readily identifiable as a bunch of Sea People's monochrome. So whoever burned the citadel area immediately settled down and moved in and settled down. In this topographical view of the site, you can see the area of the Acropolis. That's the aerial view that we just looked at there. And this huge lower city, which now was settled by the folks who moved in, the Philistines. In the center of the city, right down in the middle of the lower city, an enormous complex with a very, very large, 240 meters square building that was used throughout the 12th century and then was replaced by a very similar and similarly sized building in the 11th century. These buildings are building 351 and 350. Building 351 is the lower one. Building 350 is the upper one. And they are here in Field 4 in the middle of the lower city at McNay. In the earlier of the two buildings, Building 351, right when you first walk into the building, here's a stone threshold, there was a huge hearth. Well, I say huge. I really shouldn't say huge. It's 1.2 meters in diameter, so that's not huge. But anyway, it's pretty big, about 4 feet across. So you couldn't reach across it. So it's clearly something ceremonial. And here you see it, again, in aerial view. And it dominates the opening area of this earlier part of the building. And then you would walk around it and get into the rest of the structure. In Building 350 that replaces it, the hearth moves to, for one thing, a spot that is less problematic for walking in and out of the building. But also, it's in the main hall of the building, as you see here, but it's not any longer the most dominating feature of the building. This time it's covered with pebbles. It's the understructure of the hearth is made out of rocks and stones, and it's slightly smaller. It's about 1 meter in diameter instead of 1.2 meters in diameter. And the hearth in building 350 is behind three columns, and these are the column bases here, and you see in this reconstruction drawing. They would have held up the roof because otherwise this part of the hall would have been too wide to span with roof beams. But this makes a very impressive, almost monumental entry or gathering area. And then behind this large hall with its columns and its pebbled hearth are three smaller rooms that were covered in white plaster. So they were sort of decorated. And they had plastered stands on the back or in the corners of the rooms. And inside these various rooms, caches of interesting and weird and unusual goods were recovered. And you're looking here at just two out of a long list. And before I forget, let me say that for those of you that want to read more detail about Ekron and especially the Philistine Iron One remains that have been found there, I have put this article on the website under articles. The Rise and Fall of Ekron of the Philistines by Cy Gittin and Trudy Dotan. Recent excavations at an urban border site. It's from Biblical Archaeologist, 1987. So it's on the website as Gittin and Dotan, 1987. And a number of the pictures in here you will recognize, but there are even more, and there is tons of detail about the finds at the site. So one of the finds in one of these back rooms were 4 such knives, and you see it here in C2 in the ground, and then here all cleaned up. These knives are very unusual. They're bimetallic. That is, they have 2 kinds of metal. The blade is iron, but the rivets attaching the handle to the blade are bronze. Iron is a kind of brand new metal on the technology scene at the moment, and it is not yet being used in a widespread way. And obviously, bronze, being the metal that most people were still more comfortable with, was considered to be a little bit safer bet for attaching the handle of the knife to this. The handle itself is made out of ivory. So it's ivory with bronze rivets and an iron blade. Yeah?
This is all in like building 350.
Yes.
Did building 351 have the 3 back rooms?
Yes, it did. It did. I don't know if I can go back. Well, it's a little hard to see because of this cutaway view, but you can see in the article. But yeah, there are a series of little back rooms, and then there are also some rooms that you would get in from another direction here. So things were moved around a little, but the more or less the footprint of the building stays the same.
I'm just curious, when they do the dig between two layers, what's the difference? I mean, what does it look like when they get between 2 layers? That sounds kind of dumb, but how do they differentiate between the 2 buildings?
That is a very good question. You know, you should always be very suspicious of all these things that I tell you in class, because what I'm telling you are all conclusions based on actual nitty-gritty, getting stuff out of the dirt. So it's a completely legitimate thing to say, yeah, how do you know that? What makes you so sure that this level is before that level? You see that, let me go back one more again. You can see the walls of the building are enormously thick. At the bottom of the walls were stone foundations. But the superstructure of the walls are mud brick. And in the case of the back rooms, the mud brick has been plastered. That mud brick superstructure went up, all the way to the roof. At the time that the next phase of the building was to be constructed, the folks here deciding that they wanted to rearrange the interior of the building, they collapsed part of the walls, leveled everything out, and built the new building on top, and that made a kind of level. So when you're excavating, when they excavated here, as they went through the floor levels of this building, they first hit a kind of layer that was not floor and not with walls, but decomposed mud brick. It had fines in it. It had, random pottery and other things in it from the use of this building. But it was the collapsed walls that had been spread all around. And then once that was removed, you could see the lower part of the walls of the lower building. So in that way, it's pretty straightforward to see how you get from an upper phase down into a lower phase. Does that help?
What are the two dates of the strata?
This is more or less 12th century and 11th century. Okay, so we have our bimetallic knife. We actually have four of these. 4 bimetallic knives with ivory handles were found in one of these rooms. These are bronze wheels, and although only 3 of these bronze wheels were found, a remarkable discovery from Cyprus of the same time period, the 12th and early 11th century, from the site of Kourion on the southern coast of Cyprus, shows how such wheels, what such wheels were for. They were for a little wheeled stand, probably an incense stand, that could be ported in and out. So this was an object that was likely stored in one of these back rooms, and these back rooms were probably sort of little treasury or storerooms. And then when the object was needed, it could be wheeled on out. Of course, we don't have any idea what the upper part of the McNay stand would have looked like. This is the one from Cyprus, but clearly the wheels would have, and you can even see they were functioning. They aren't decorative. Little hole for the axle. Well, it's inside this building. We haven't actually determined yet what this building was for. The Kourion object comes from a temple. Oh, I didn't realize I was going to get to that already. Okay. At McNay, this large building, in fact, I'll go back a few slides. This large complex, buildings 351 and 350, smack in the middle of the lower city, what is it? The hearth suggests some kind of public ceremonial activity. The fines suggest some special, not domestic, not administrative function. There are also an unusually wide array of faunal remains from 350 and 351 as compared to the faunal remains found in these strata and other excavation areas in the city. And most predominantly included in buildings 350 and 351 were found chicken bones. The faunal profile, incidentally, at McNay is pretty different from that which existed at the site in the Late Bronze Age. In the Late Bronze Age, the majority of the faunal remains, the bone remains, were sheep and goat, or as we say in archaeological terms, sheep-goat, because we can't tell the difference between sheep and goat, generally speaking, in faunal remains. So they tend to be classified as one thing, sheep/goat. The great majority, over 50% of the bones, were that. And then there were cattle, and cattle with usually a young profile, that is to say, killed at a young age. In the Iron Age levels, in Iron 1, 28% of the fauna are pig. That's brand new. There had been essentially no pig bones in the Canaanite levels. 28% of the fauna are pig. There's a certain amount of dog. There's a little bit of sheep, goat. And the cattle profile ages out. That is, most of the cattle bones are now of old cows, not young cows, which suggests that now the cattle are being used as work animals and not being raised for food. And so, of course, they're allowed to live. They keep on living. So back to buildings 350 and 351. The excavators originally identified these as temples. And it's possible that they were essentially shrines. But it is also possible that they are some kind of combination central administrative and ceremonial unit. And they did have, each of them had, upper stories. And that's for sure. One key indication is the incredible width of the exterior walls and the interior walls, which definitely were made to be able to support a second story. So there could well have been, there probably were, people living above this. And more lately, the identification of this area has been thought to be some kind of combination of administrative with public gathering and public ceremony, but not a temple per se. There has been a shrine, a small shrine, found up here in Field 1 on the Acropolis, just a little casual one, and the kinds of discoveries inside that lead the archaeologists to believe it's a shrine I will be getting to momentarily. Okay. So in the 12th century, in this first stage of Sea People's monochrome Philistine settlement, which is in this area that's darker gray down here, there is some very interesting information about the difference in the structure of the settlement of these Philistines compared to the people who had lived here before, that is to say, the Canaanites. These are statistics that I gave you when we talked about the settlement pattern of the Bronze Age. In the Middle and the Late Bronze Age, in Philistia specifically, 49%, just under half of the settlements were large, 36% medium, 16% small. We talked about that as a kind of well-integrated urban, town, village system. In Philistia, in the Iron One, the total number of sites shrinks to just under half the number that there had been. There were 102 sites attested throughout this region in the Middle and the Late Bronze Age. There are only 49 in Iron One. But the total amount of built-up area stays almost the same, from 173 hectares to 155 hectares. The difference is that more people, now 3/4, are living in large cities, large sites, and very, very few in medium and small sites. In other words, the Philistines have a disproportionately urban settlement pattern. In the early stage of Philistine settlement, Sea People monochrome phase, SPM phase, Ramses III, the great Ramses, who says that their seed is not, and he has completely eradicated them, that guy, is still alive. He dies in 1164. And with the death of Ramses III, the Egyptian New Kingdom pretty much starts to disintegrate. And with Egyptian power rapidly diminishing, Philistine settlement turns into Philistine expansion throughout this larger area. And more sites, more small sites show up in a wide band that includes now the rest of the Shvelah and up into the middle part, the central part of the coastal plain. The hook right here in this gray area is because this already starts to be the upland area of the Shvela going into the central hills. So the Philistines stay on low ground, but they expand widely into practically all the low ground surrounding the area of their initial settlement. And here is one of the little sites that the Philistines expand to, Tel McNay, which is up here in this area near modern-day Tel Aviv. And you're looking here at a topographical view of Tel McNay, and you see that it's an organized site. It's laid out in an organized way. It's a very small site. It's only about 4 hectares, so it's tiny. And it's built in a kind of grid pattern. Orthogonal, that is to say, streets at 90-degree angles, laid out, with houses laid out inside the street area, inside the blocks. The houses are all more or less the same size. They're about 10 meters square in area. They aren't square houses, but the area that they take up is about 10 meters square. And they're very, very similar each to another, as you can see. They have a very similar layout. They have one long room and, 2 long rooms, making usually meeting at right angles, around a larger room that had some columns holding up a roof on one side and then probably an open courtyard in the middle. And pretty much all of the houses have that as a layout. So, like McNay, Kasile shows a sense of planning behind the layout of the town. It's not helter-skelter. It's pretty organized.
Yeah, I wonder if it is, so is the Philistine culture like city-state culture, or is there some kind of government is the expansion just cultural?
Well, is what is behind your question the political organization of the Philistines?
Was this expansion just like a cultural expansion?
It is. It is. It's a cultural expansion. It's not accompanied by destructions. After the initial wave of destruction at these big sites in the southern coastal plain in the Shvela, when the Philistines initially settled down, after that, we don't see. They don't expand by conquering. They just move out. So here at Kasile, this site is there were earlier levels here, but there had been a period of abandonment. The site was abandoned, and these folks move in. And it's actually a good question to say, how do we know they're Philistines? The reason that the settlement is identified as Philistine is because almost 20% of the pottery is Philistine bichrome. That's the way that these settlements become identified, because a significant amount of the pottery is that type of pottery. If there would just be a little bit of it, 2%, 3%, then you would say, well, somebody liked bichrome birds, and so they got a few bowls. But when there's that much of it, the people who live there are identified as that.
Do you know where the Philistines came from?
Oh, you're about to find that out just in about 4 minutes. We do know, and soon you will too. So that's a good question. Okay. To get back to your first question, the original settlement, the original Sea People monochrome phase, is confined almost exclusively to 5 big cities. And those 5 big cities are Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, and Safi, which is ancient Gath, G-A-T-H. Now, although I don't usually like to toggle back and forth like this, but I will say for all of you who are biblically minded, in the Hebrew Bible, the Philistines are identified as city dwellers, and there are 5 large cities that are associated with them, and it's called by Bible scholars the Philistine Pentapolis, that is, the Philistine Confederation of 5 cities. We don't have any reason to think that it's some sort of confederation. It's just that at all of these sites, we find the same things. So culturally, they seem to be the same people. But there's no reason to think that, like with the Canaanites, where we found the same things at various big sites, but we had reason to believe that there was a king here and a king there, and a sort of person in charge at each place, at Megiddo, at Hatzor, at Gezer. Likewise here, it's probable that there was some big dude in charge, and there was a zone around the city that provided the agricultural support for that city. And so there were these various spots where people settled. Okay, so Tel McNay, a small site in the second phase of Philistine expansion, the Philistine Bichrome phase, 11th century, organized orthogonal plan. And like with McNay, where there was a little shrine place embedded in the area of Field 1, here too there is what looks to be some sort of religious building embedded in with the town buildings, and it's right here. Here you see it in aerial view, and here you see it in plan. A very modest little structure. It actually goes through 3 phases, and in its first phase, it's only this central room, which you see here. And the central room is added onto by an entryway, and then eventually a little storeroom is put in the back. There are benches, mud brick plastered benches around, and you can see the benches here and here. And there is a little platform, and here's that platform. There's a single column base in the middle of the main room to hold up the roof. No hearth, but just a small, modest little shrine, and a series of small incense bowls on stands were found in the shrine. Oddly shaped vessels that one assumes are for some kind of ceremony, because it's hard to figure what sort of practical thing you would do with them. And you see some of them having been, they were found in here, although it was not found this tidy. It was cleaned up, and then everything was posed for a picture. So it looks very, very nice. Inside houses, there are, at various of these Philistine sites, there are fragments of an object like this. This is the only whole one of these objects that have been found. This is the first of these objects that were found. It was found at the Philistine site of Ashdod. And because it was the first and she was found at Ashdod, she was given a little name by the excavator, Moshe Dotan. She is called Ashdoda, which is the Ashdod lady. And she is a combination lady and chair, so a 2 for 1. She has the upper body. I know she's a little weird. She has the upper body of a person with a Modigliani-like very long neck and a really weird little triangular bird-shaped face with a sticky outy nose. Breasts, so that you can be sure of what her gender is. But then her lower portion is a chair. So she's some sort of enthroned female. This physiognomy is replicated, or very similar to, anyway, other objects which are associated with cults. So here's an incense stand from a shrine found at Ashdod, and you see the little musicians with the same sort of beaky nose on their cute little faces. And this is very cute. This is a bronze pin that was found at Ashkelon, and again, you see the same sort of weird bird-like physiognomy on the head of the little pin. Ashdod? Oh, I think she's about 4. Let's see, I think I wrote this down. Did I write you down? I did not. But she's about like this. So she's not gigantic. She's a figurine. All right. So the Philistines are clearly very different folks than the Canaanites. Even if we didn't have the Egyptian reliefs that show the drawings of the Philistines and other Egyptian reliefs that show the drawings of the Canaanites, and we could see clearly that they look very different. So obviously to the Egyptians, they were very different folks. Even if we didn't have that, we would know from the archaeological remains that no matter what they looked like, they lived very differently. They had different cultures. They were disproportionately urban. They have a female deity, as far as we can tell, the main deity. The main deity is female. Anyway, there's absolutely no indication of a male deity from the archaeological remains. In the earliest phases, when they settle down, their ceremonies, their public rituals include some kind of gathering room around large hearths. They have a distinctive design sense for their pottery that includes all sorts of free hand, swirly, curly cues and wavy lines. They plan their towns, and their temples or shrines are embedded in a very modest and unassuming way inside the town. So unlike the huge temple at Hatzor on the citadel, or the large orthostat temple in Area H in the lower city that commands its own space, the shrine areas of the Philistine sites are modest and embedded within these planned towns. And these towns are planned with functionally discrete areas. So the culture of the Philistines, very different than the culture of the Canaanites. And except for the initial landfall and the havoc wreaking that they make when they first move in, they stop fighting after that. We don't have any evidence of warfare after that. All right, who are they? Practically all the material elements of the Philistines that we recover archaeologically have very good parallels someplace else. And the place that they have good parallels is Greece. You're looking here at a gold funerary mask from shaft grave 4 at Mycenae, a site in southern Greece. This funerary mask shows the face of a Mycenaean Greek from the 14th century. The culture that this mask comes from grows in the 13th century into a palatially based culture with large cities, administration, and huge public buildings, public palatial buildings. And those public palatial buildings are all centered on an enormous hearth. Here's the hearth from McNay, and here is the hearth in the main palace of a city in southern Greece, right down here, called Pylos. This is a view looking from the rear of the palace at Pylos. There's some storerooms back here. The entrance is actually here. And you see this large hearth surrounded by 4 columns which held up the roof and allowed there to be an air opening above. This back room of this palatial complex of Mycenaean Greece is replicated at many other large cities from the late Bronze Age in Greece. So here's the palace now at Pylos looking in the other way. When I say Mycenaean, I'm talking about the late Bronze Age. The late Bronze Age is the Mycenaean period in Greece. And it is the 14th, 13th, and early 12th centuries. Here is a reconstruction drawing of that main hearth room that you saw just a moment ago. Here's the hearth. There are the 4 columns. You see a throne on one side in all the well-preserved spaces like this in Mycenaean Greece. There is a throne on one side of the hearth room. In this reconstruction drawing, there's a man seated in the throne, but Greek archaeologists who have been studying and thinking about the specific manner of public ceremony in Mycenaean Greece have concluded that the main ceremonial figure in the Greek world was almost certainly female.
Was this migration match the same time as the Mycenaean? Was it the same time Mycenaeans? There was some cataclysms in the island areas there.
Yes?
So this, okay.
We'll get there. The answer is yes, yes, yes. So here you're looking at some frescoes from Mycenaean Greece. You see a woman who's obviously in the guise of some sort of priestess or helper in a ceremony. She's holding shafts of wheat. As she walks along, she has some really weird thing on her head. Weird things on one's head generally are a mark of some sort of ceremonial function, not just some new fashion in hat styles. Here another very dignified woman processing along. Here an idol, a terracotta idol that was found in a shrine at Mycenae. All the major palace sites of Mycenaean Greece have frescoes, and in the frescoes, the main attending personages are always female. There are no ceremonial men walking along. There are men in the guise of hunters or bringing animals in, so working, but not in any kind of official or ceremonial way. And in the shrines on the palatial sites, the representations of some sort of deity are always also female, such as you see here. These are all official ceremonial objects, but in houses throughout the Mycenaean world, throughout Greece in this period, in the Late Bronze Age, there were small terracotta figurines of the sort you see here, again, also female, that were obviously something that people used in a kind of household cult or for household religion. They're called phi and psi figurines based on the Greek letters, the Greek letter phi and the Greek letter psi, and the figurines obviously look very much like those, the Greek letter phi and the Greek letter psi. And it's easy to see the family resemblance between Ashdoda and her weird little triangular shaped headdress and beaky nose and these cult figurines of Mycenaean Greece. And I note that Ashdoda and her ilk and fragments of Ashdoda figurines have been found at Kassile and Ekron and Ashkelon, in addition to Ashdod. And I think actually now some at Safi as well, are only found in domestic contexts. So Ashdoda does not occur in the public ceremonial context. She is more akin to the phi and psi figurines, or phi and psi figurines. That is to say, found in domestic contexts. So the hearth, the female deity, the mode of the representation of the female deity, the pottery. Here is a late Bronze Age, a Mycenaean jar from Argos, monochromatic designs, happy little swirlies all over the body, very similar to Sea People's monochrome, both in the kind of decoration and in the color choice used, which is to say this boring single color on the clay background. The shapes of the pottery made by the Philistines, also very similar to the shapes of pottery that we know of from Mycenaean Greece. So you can see, obviously, the complete similarity in design and in style. This is from Ashkelon. This is from Mycenae. And the important point about this is that all of this stuff is made in Philistia. This is not Mycenaean. This is Sea People's bichrome made in Ashkelon. This is Mycenaean made in Greece. Even the shapes of some of the weirder pots that the Philistines make are paralleled very closely from the Mycenaean world. So the stirrup jar that you see down here, here are a bunch of undecorated and decorated such from the Mycenaean world. Painted decoration on the vessels, again, links the Sea Peoples with the Mycenaean Greeks. So here is a very enlarged drawing. You can see how the Egyptians came up with that wacky headdress thing that they had for all the Philistines. Because when the Philistines draw themselves, it's like either they all had bad hair days, or this is some headdress, or I don't know what. Nobody else looks like this in antiquity. Only the Philistines look like this. They look like they've just put their finger in an electrical socket. Single beady eyes and their hair is sticking up in all directions. So here's the shirt from Ashkelon. I'm showing a couple people doing who knows what. And here are some various drawings of pots from the Mycenaean world, including this very adorable vessel from Mycenae from the 12th century, the so-called warrior vase, found at the site, showing happy Mycenaeans on their way to something. So the case is quite ironclad, both in the most banal level of material culture, which is to say the decoration and style of common pottery that you make, the shapes that you make, to the highest levels, the key element of ceremony being a huge hearth, the kind of deity, female deity, the mode of representation, where she's found, et cetera, link the Mycenaeans with the Philistines. And in that regard, I should note that one of the Sea People's tribal names, the Denyen, actually that would be Egyptian for a group that, for anybody who knows Greek, you should be able to recognize as the Danaoi from Homeric poems, from the Iliad, the Danaans, who are Greek. So, for those of you that know something about the classical world, you know that in the 12th century, the great Mycenaean cities of southern and central Greece experience large problems. Most of the palaces are destroyed. There used to be a theory that one of the destroyers, one of the reasons for the destruction of the Mycenaean cities, were the Sea Peoples. We knew about the Sea Peoples because of the slamming that they get from Ramses III on the pylon of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu in Thebes. So we knew that there were these bad guys out and about making trouble here and there, but it wasn't until serious excavation of the area of Philistia and the piecing together of all these links by archaeologists working in the last 20 years that we realized that it can't be the Sea Peoples who make the problem for the Mycenaeans, because the Sea Peoples are the Mycenaeans. That's who they are. They start from up in this zone, and they make their way along the Asia Minor coast, wreaking havoc for those islands of the north, as Ramses III put it, making problems for the Hittites, whose king writes to the Egyptian king saying, trouble on the loose, let's get ready. They make landfall in Cyprus and make problems all down the Levantine coast. Their depredations are recorded by Ramses III when they come into contact with him on the edges of the delta. And eventually, some of them, the Peleset, move into and settle in the area that we know of as Philistia. So in the 12th century, we have destruction and new occupation of a whole group of people down in this area. There are also other sea peoples who make landfall at sites north of Philistia. The Sicels settle at Dor, the Sherden settle in Akko. Actually, successors of the Sicels and the Sherden then move back out into the Mediterranean. They move to Sicily. That's how we get the name Sicily. They move to Sardinia. That's how we get the name Sardinia from the Sherden. And it's possible that some of them move in and make problems for some of the cities in this region that are more inland, like Megiddo, stratum 6a, the 11th century stratum, which is also destroyed. Megiddo stratum 6a is destroyed very thoroughly. But other cities in the interior in the 11th century are also destroyed very systematically. And the key one is Hatzor, up here. And there's no evidence that the Sea Peoples had anything to do with this. We cannot blame an Egyptian, and we probably can't blame the Sea Peoples because, A, we don't find any Sea Peoples monochrome at the site of Hatzor after the destruction, and B, we don't find any continued use of the site by the Sea Peoples, and C, Hatzor is pretty off the beaten track for the Sea Peoples, quite a ways inland. You would have to go not just through the Jezreel Valley, but then over some pretty high mountains in order to get to the site, and this is not the modus operandi that we can recognize with the Sea Peoples. And yet, at Hatzor, that enormous temple on the top of the citadel and the other temples in the lower part of the lower city, very, very badly destroyed, burned so hard that the black basalt orthostats crack. The 2-ton throne that separates the upper and the lower city broke into over 1,000 pieces from the fire. And the cult objects in the temples were systematically mutilated. If it's not the Egyptians, and it's not the Philistines, who is it? See you next time.